come make your product in America, or you will have to pay a tariff, which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury.
Oh, good old America, land of the free, home of the brave. And the country that just loves a good tariff war. Because if there's one thing the US has mastered, it's looking out for its own economic interests. Dreaming of importing that sleek European truck? You better think twice, because there's a 25% tariff right there. Of course, you can always import a cheaper vehicle from Mexico or Canada without paying that border tax. Well, I mean, maybe not for so long.
We've been mistreated very badly by many countries, not just Canada and Mexico. The tariffs are going forward.
The idea of tariffs is always the same. Protect industries, save jobs, keep the economy strong. But here's the thing. History is full of governments trying to protect the people by slapping taxes on foreign goods. And guess what? It can backfire. Like a bazooka backfire. And it did. Except one time that we'll see. Just ask the British when they tried to protect their farmers with the Corn Laws and ended up starving their own people.
Please, sir, I want some more.
What? But we'll come to that. Let's stay in the US for now and rewind about 100 years. Because if there's one tariff disaster that truly takes the cake for Uncle Sam, it's this one. The trade war that made the Great Depression worse. They call it the mother of all trade wars. A sort of Daenerys Targaryen, the Dragon Queen of Game of Thrones, version of economic policy, starting with grand ambitions, ending in total destruction. The year is 1930. America is already in trouble, having been hit hard by the Great Depression. Factories are shutting down, mills and mines lie abandoned, and people across the nation are going hungry. It's a real mess. The White House and Congress have come up with something, a plan that would relaunch the country's productivity. That brilliant solution? Tariffs. And it does sound logical. Make foreign products more expensive so Americans buy local, factories reopen, and workers get their job back. And what could possibly go wrong? Well, actually, pretty much everything. Shit! The law was officially named the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, after its two political sponsors. It raised import taxes on over 20,000 foreign goods, with duties soaring to nearly 40% in some cases. But the problem is, the rest of the world didn't exactly take it well. Canada, France, Spain, Italy, and Germany each slapped retaliatory tariffs on American products. But the biggest surprise? Switzerland. A country famous for neutrality, discreet banking, and sweet chocolate suddenly took a stand. Knowing full well that they couldn't win a trade war against the US, they did something almost unheard of back then. They boycotted American goods altogether. Now, you might be thinking, what harm could a Swiss boycott possibly do to the US? Well, plenty. The automobile industry took a hit, but the biggest casualty? Typewriters. They were the computers of the 1930s. Swiss bankers, obsessed with precision and efficiency, preferred American-made typewriters. With the boycott in place, US manufacturers lost one of their most loyal customers. And when even the most peaceful, neutral nation in the world is saying, yeah, no thanks, you know you've messed up. The consequences were brutal. Unemployment rate was at 8% when the Smoot-Hawley Act was passed, but it jumped to 25% by 1933. Of course, the Great Depression was already in motion before the law, but the tariff law worsened the crisis by shrinking global trade, import and export from the US. Instead of saving American jobs, the tariff forced countless companies to shut down within just 4 years. And the craziest part? President Hoover didn't even want to sign the bill. He was warned. Over 1,000 economists begged him to veto it. Even Wall Street pleaded with him to back down. But under intense pressure from his own party, Hoover caved. Too bad, Mr. President. Should have gone full Targaryen mode on this, which basically means listening to nobody. Now, let's take a ship to England, more than a century before the Great Depression. And when I say ship, I mean it. Because if you were a merchant sailing into Britain's ports in the early 1800s, your cargo, especially if it was grain, was about to become a political weapon. Sailing towards Britain's shores, you weren't just battling the waves. You were about to crash into one of the most infamous protectionist policies in history. In 1815, the Seventh Coalition won the war over Napoleon's France. Britain had secured victory, but now it had a new battle to fight. An economic one. With the war over, cheap grain from Europe was set to flood the British market. For the working class, this should have meant great news. Cheaper bread, lower food prices, and an easier life. But it wasn't such good news for Britain's wealthy landowners, who had profited from high grain prices during the last few years. And of course, it was not the working class who sat at the parliament. It was landowners, aristocrats, the elite who rigged the system. A set of trade restrictions passed in 1815 to make sure foreign grain stayed out. The rules were simple. No foreign grains could be imported until domestic wheat prices reached an artificially high level. This law, with some variations, remained in place for nearly 40 years. At first, the Corn Laws seemed like a victory for Britain's landowning elite. With cheap foreign grain locked out, domestic farmers and landlords could continue selling at inflated prices. But for the vast majority of Britain's population, especially industrial workers in rapidly growing cities, this was a disaster. Bread was the foundation of the British diet, and suddenly,
pies for a penny.
It was expensive. Factory workers in Manchester, Birmingham, and London spent a disproportionate share of their wages just to afford a basic meal. And when the food prices soared, so did unrest. By the 1830s, the pressure was mounting. Reformers like Richard Cobden and John Bright led the Anti-Corn Law League, demanding free trade. Then came the breaking point, the Irish potato famine, one of the worst famines in history. 3 million people died, and politics finally decided to change the laws. Even Prime Minister Robert Peel saw the writing on the wall. In 1846, Parliament repealed the Corn Laws. Food prices dropped, industry flourished, and Britain embraced free trade. In 2021, a study dug into the repeal of the Corn Laws in the United Kingdom. Did it really help the people? Well, it actually benefited the bottom 90% of income, while causing income losses for the top 10%. That's what we can call a blowback. Did you know that not long ago, it was cheaper to fly from Argentina to Miami, buy an iPhone in the US, and fly back than to purchase it locally in Buenos Aires? That's how high inflation has been in Argentina. And it's also a direct consequence of decades of tariff in this country that once was one of the richest in the world. In the early 20th century, Argentina was a powerhouse. It had a thriving agricultural sector, vast natural resources, and a booming export economy. Its GDP per capita rivaled that of the United States and Western Europe. But by the mid-20th century, a dramatic shift took place. One that would send the country into a cycle of stagnation, inflation, and economic collapse. After World War II, Juan Perón, colonel and populist leader, took over power. Deeply afraid of communism and inspired by Mussolini's nationalism, he was eager to make Argentina self-sufficient and reduce the country's dependence on foreign imports. He applied a theory called substitution industrialization. To put it simply, it's all about replacing foreign imports with domestic production. That includes massive tariffs to keep foreign goods out, heavy subsidies for domestic industries, and a strict currency control. A strategy that would prove to be ineffective at best, dangerous at worst in the long run. Industries lost the incentive to be innovative and improve their productivity, resulting in lower quality and higher production costs. This made Argentinian exports less competitive in the global markets. Meanwhile, Argentina's core strength, its agricultural exports, began to suffer. Other nations retaliated against Argentina's tariffs by reducing imports of Argentinian beef and wheat, cutting off a crucial source of revenue. But these politics didn't die with the fall of Juan Perón in 1955. Instead, protectionism became the watchword of every government that followed, whatever their political stance. A never-ending cycle of tariffs, subsidies, and reckless money printing that dragged Argentina deeper into the abyss. By the 1980s, Argentina had become an economic madhouse. Hyperinflation was so out of control that prices doubled in a matter of weeks. Salaries lost all meaning, and families rushed to the stores the second they got paid, knowing their money would be worthless by morning. Then came the debt default of 2001, a financial apocalypse that left the country's economics on its knees. Decades later, Argentina was still trapped in the same nightmare, and Argentinians looked abroad, even for something as simple as a phone. They're only starting to solve inflation now, with the drastic remedy that President Javier Milei is administering to the country. If Argentinians had to take a plane to buy a cheaper iPhone, Indians could wait up to 15 years to buy a car in the 1960s. Yes, you heard that correctly. It just sounds like the Soviet Union that Ronald Reagan used to joke about.
Laid down his money, and then the fellow that was in charge said to him, "Okay, come back in 10 years and get your car." And he said, "Morning or afternoon?" And the fellow behind the counter said, "Well, 10 years from now, what difference does it make?" And he said, "Well, the plumber's coming in the morning."
And we're not talking about a premium car, not a Ferrari, not a Mercedes. Just a simple, no-frills Indian car, most likely a Hindustan Ambassador, which has, we have to admit, a vintage vibe today. But back then, a nightmare for Indian drivers. But it was not only about the car, but about the wait. You had to apply for a permit, wait a year, 2 years, maybe 10 or 15. And because demand massively outstripped supply, used cars could cost more than brand new ones. That's right, your 10-year-old Ambassador was an appreciating asset, not because it was good, but because there was no other choice. Why? Because of protectionism, a tariff law that went down in history as License Raj. It all started in 1947, when India gained independence. The country had been exploited by the British for centuries, and its leaders were determined to never be at the mercy of foreign powers again. The plan? Self-reliance at all costs. Import tariffs went through the roof. Foreign companies were locked out.
Come on!
And starting a business was a nightmare. The state would decide what was produced, the quantity of production, market price, and even the capital used in production. And yes, of course it created a gigantic, slow-moving bureaucratic mess. And while India is the world's fastest-growing major economy today, back then it nearly destroyed the young country. The economy grew at a pathetic 3% per year, a rate so embarrassingly slow it was nicknamed the Hindu rate of growth, a term still used today by economics around the planet. Desperate times call for desperate measures, right? It was clear. The License Raj had to go. After nearly 40 years, the Indian government decided to sculpt decades of protectionist policies almost overnight. So far, we've seen tariffs wreck economies, destroy industries, and trap nations in cycles of stagnation. But what if, just once, protectionism actually worked? In 1953, after the Korean War, South Korea was in survival mode. With almost no industry, a reliance on agriculture, and a GDP hitting rock bottom, the country was poorer than most of Africa. Then, Park Chung-hee arrived. He was no choir boy, nor was he a huge fan of democracy. As a military man who took power in a coup in 1961, Park wasn't interested in debates or half measures. He wanted results. And his vision? Turn South Korea into an industrial powerhouse, no matter the cost. He knew from the beginning that no country the size of South Korea could become rich thanks to agriculture. So he decided nearly instantly to turn the country into an industrial base. First, he introduced high tariffs and import restrictions to keep foreign companies out. The goal was to shield Korean industries from competition and allow them to grow in peace. The state took control over the banks, directing loans only to strategic industries like steel, shipbuilding, and electronics. The government also backed conglomerates called chaebols in South Korea. You certainly know these companies today. They're called Samsung, Hyundai, or LG. At first, it looked like South Korea was following the same protectionist mistakes that had doomed Argentina or India. But here's the thing. Park Chung-hee had a plan. First, Park wasn't just handing out free money. Companies had to perform, and they had to perform on a global scale. The government created a strict export-first policy. Companies couldn't just survive on local sales. They had to compete globally. Second, and most importantly, Park played the tariff game differently. Unlike other leaders who kept protectionism forever, Park used tariffs as a launchpad, not a permanent crutch. By the 1980s, South Korea had built up its industries under this protective shield. But instead of clinging to tariffs, the government flipped the switch. They slashed tariffs and opened up to foreign competitions, and foreign investment was welcomed instead of blocked. The rest is history. The rapid economic growth of South Korea is now called the miracle on the Han River. South Korea's success wasn't just about tariffs. It was about timing, discipline, and knowing when to let go. So, can protectionism ever work? Yes, but only when it's a launchpad, not a prison. Subscribe. History is the best launchpad to understand the world. Every time.